Testing, testing.
Hi, I'm John Creekmur. We have been working with people since 1991, helping them accomplish huge financial goals in their life. In that period of time, we've noticed that really there are two different types of clients. They look a lot alike. Similar incomes, very similar asset levels, and quite honestly, their goals, they look pretty similar. But we started to notice whenever we sat down and started putting together a financial plan and giving them action steps that over the years, their outcomes, well, they were a little bit different.
What we noticed is that one group of clients tended to stay on their plan, stay with the action steps, and really did tend to move towards their goals a little bit more successfully, while the other group was distracted, whether it be by stock market moving up and down or maybe even just toys they wanted to buy. They really didn't seem to accomplish their goals in the same way as the first group.
We started looking at the common factors in clients able to accomplish their goals. We were able to bring it down to 5 relevant principles that play into the definition of true wealth.
First, know what's most important to you and why.
By identifying core values in your life, those things that are most important to you and the people that you hold dear, that gives you a great foundation to build upon whenever you're making financial decisions.
Second, stick to your core values in decision making.
It seems like the media is constantly chattering. It plays upon our emotions, it plays upon our decision making. It really takes us off base of where we need to be. One of the key things is stick to our core values whenever we're making financial decisions.
Third, be open to wise counselors.
In our financial lives, we need to center ourselves around people, wise counselors, that are going to listen to us, help us build a plan which is firmly focused upon your goals and your core values, and sometimes even encourage you to do things maybe that you don't want to hear, but that will help you accomplish your goals.
Fourth, wisely set your financial resources.
When you have identified your core values, those things that are most dear to you, and then you're listening to wise counselors, you're more able to put together a plan and execute that and set your financial resources not only to accomplish the goals, but to impact those closest to you and the organizations that are most meaningful to you.
And fifth, live with a spirit of gratitude.
You know, there's so many things in life that we cannot control. And some of those things are great and turn out well, and others are a real challenge. No matter where it is in life that we are at, whenever we can live with a spirit of gratitude and thankfulness, the plan ends up coming together. True wealth, all the things in life that money cannot buy.
It's not just a phrase that sounds good, but a truth that we live by as we focus on the things that are more important to us than money.
So what about you? Who are the people that you cherish? Who are those that you want to live life with and enjoy doing things with? When it comes down to it, what is your definition of true wealth?
Please welcome Andy Anderson.
If there's one rule about presenting, it's probably don't go before you're introduced. But with that, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Happy March to you. I don't know if you're like me, but once we get past daylight savings and we get that extra hour of light in the evening, I'm just a happier guy. So it's a good time of year. We're starting into spring. For those of you that have to meet with me in the gloom and dark of winter, I'm sorry for being grumpy, but I'm good to go now. So hopefully you're all doing well. It's great to be out here with you tonight. We're very thankful for the chance to work with all of you, and we really like the opportunity to do events like these to hopefully educate and encourage you as we go along the path towards whatever goals you're working toward. For all of you here tonight, and for those of you joining us via live stream, I want to let you know that throughout the presentation, if questions come up, feel free to send a text off to our office number. It was up on the screen, 309-925-2043. If you send a question to that number, that's going to go through to our channel, and we'll see those, and John's going to have some time at the end to answer any questions you have. So with that, thank you all for coming out. I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight, John Creekmur.
1991, Stacy and I got married. And so that's now been 33 years this summer. And in the first 6 years of our marriage, we lived in 8 different locations. We moved a lot. Then we ended up having the ability and the honor to purchase a family farm. And in that family farm, we lived out on Springfield Road in Pekin. And we lived there from 1997 through 2010. And the main floor of the house had a little over 800 square feet. There was 2 bedrooms. We had myself and Stacy and 3 boys that were all growing, a number of foster kids, and we realized the house is getting kind of small. So then I was approached by a family member, a bootstrap family member, that had some farmland and some woods 1/2 a mile from our house. It was actually the land that our boys, when they were growing up, they would take their little compound bows and their arrows, and they would walk across the cornfields when it was muddy, and they would go and sit underneath a huge tree and just watch things, and then they would walk back through the muddy fields, and oftentimes one of the 3 would have his shoes left in the mud field because they got stuck in the mud, and then they were sent back out there dutifully to get their shoes. And so then all of a sudden, then we looked at this land and we were approached by Merle, and he says, hey, would you guys be interested in buying some of my land? So in 2010, we acquired this land. Then we sold our house, and it was time to build. Stacy and I started this building project, and we started off not with the exact house we wanted to build, but we started with how do we want to live in the house? What is it we want to do? And so obviously we needed bedrooms, we needed a kitchen, but we started gravitating toward bigger thoughts. We started talking about what do we want our life to look like in this house? What is it we really want? What's important to us? What are the things that we value? And so if you've ever been to our house, when you walk in the front door, you see a huge, huge open area. There's the living room, there's the dining room, and the kitchen. And it's all totally open. And it was quite an engineering feat to make that happen. Why do we want that? We wanted to have a location in which we could have family over continuously. We wanted to be able to celebrate large holidays there with our family and extended family, with people from the community. We wanted to be able to invite a lot of people into our house all at one time. So that was what we wanted. So we sat down, we got together with the builder, we got together with an architect, we explained what we wanted, we gave them an example of a house that looked incredible. The architect built out the blueprints. We sat down with the builder, and he had our budget ahead of time, and he says, hey guys, we can do this, and the price is this dollar amount. It was actually 50% higher than our top budget. And so we're sitting there looking at that, and I just said, hey, why is it so much higher? Whenever I calculated the cost per square foot, it should be about the top end of our range. Why was it 50% higher? And his dad, the builder's father, who at the time was upper 70s, and his son was actually buying the construction business from him, he was sitting in a chair in the table right behind me. I think he may have been stationed there intentionally. And he says, hey guys, can I come over and look at this and point something out to you? Sure. So he looked at the plans and he says, you see this one angle right here? I said, yeah. Well, you see, the front of the house was this beautiful entry. And there was this angle on the house. It wasn't a regular angle, but there was an angle on the house that opened up the front of the house. There's a lot of landscaping around it. He said that one angle impacts the foundation. It impacts every cut. It impacts every single piece of work that we do. And so your labor is going to be about 40% higher, and your materials are going to be about 50% higher. That one angle is what drove the higher price. And I said, well, if we take that angle out of there, can we still accomplish what we want to accomplish in the house? Well, he said, most assuredly, you can do that. So we built the house, we moved in, and it's been so interesting. Over the last, 2012 we moved in, so we're still there. So over the last 12 years, we have had large family gatherings with between 20 and 50 people at our house. It's just an incredible thing. Every holiday, coming up this Easter, we're having another family gathering with a large amount of family and extended family. We've built phenomenal memories in the house in those 3 large open rooms. We have extended family that stay at our house continually, coming in whenever they're traveling and stop there. We can build memories with them. And all of a sudden, I started thinking back. There was a blueprint that was built based upon what we described that our goals were. But as we started to look at the blueprint, there was a problem. We couldn't afford to build it with the exact way that it looked. And so in this case, the architect and the senior builder pointed that out, and they were able to help us modify the plan so we could still accomplish our goals and still be able to live in the house the way that we wanted to. When it comes right down to it, whether you're here in East Peoria, Illinois, or you're watching right now from Michigan or Maumee, Ohio, or Denver or out in California, if you're sitting in Texas, if you're out in Florida, wherever it is you're watching from tonight and you're engaged, it is critical to make sure that you're talking continuously with people that are wise counselors, people that have experience, people that can help put together a plan to help you accomplish your goals. And 2023 is an interesting year in the market. Let's take look a year back. In 2022, we had a little bit of topsy-turvy. So we know the S&P 500 was down roughly 20%. The NASDAQ was down over 30%. The Lehman Brothers Aggregate Bond Index, which is supposedly a safety index based of bonds, both governmental and corporate, was down over 16% all in 2022. That is the largest decrease of both the equity and bond market combined in the history of measurements in the United States of America. Never seen that before. Why did that happen? Well, it happened because 2 previous years, in 2020 and 2021, our federal government made a lot of decisions to basically lower interest rates down, but to also flood the economy with large amounts of dollars. And then, surprise, surprise to everyone, that led to large amounts of inflation. And then all of a sudden, in 2022, they recognized we need to stop inflation, or otherwise it's going to be totally out of control. And once inflation gets out of control, it's difficult to stop. So they raised interest rates, and they raised them from 0%, in essence, all the way up to 5.5% over 11 months. At the same time, they also started pulling between $85 and $95 billion a month out of the economy. That was a shock to the financial system. So whenever that happened in 2022, we saw equity markets and we saw fixed income markets both collapse. In 2023, in the first half of 2023, from January all the way through the end of March, you can see the stock market went up quickly and then it came back down. At the end of March, it was relatively at a break-even point. But then it started moving higher. And we see this nice run up until we get to about September. And in September, October, November, it came back down. Why did it start to have those drastic movements? When there was a shock to the system in 2022, there's some time of recovery. It's just like if you have a medical issue in your life. And so you walk through recovery periods, there's a little bit of making progress, and then you sometimes regress a little bit. Well, ultimately, that regression was caused by changes in the interest rate marketplace. What were those changes really being driven by? You can see it clearly. November the 1st, we all of a sudden see this huge, sharp increase where the stock market went up the last 2 months of 2023. What caused that was inflation numbers started coming down. When inflation numbers started coming down, people started saying, the Federal Reserve, they're going to lower interest rates. And so people started pricing into the stock market the Federal Reserve decreasing interest rates over the next 12 months 6 times. The interest rates are coming down 6 times. All of a sudden, when they said that, they thought, okay, they're cooling things off. The economy is going to go into a really kind of a slow down. It's not going to go into a deep recession. Interest rates are coming down. That's good for everybody. The stock market screamed higher. That continued on in the first 2 months of 2024. Now, all of a sudden, we're trying to figure out how many times we're going to see interest rates decrease this year. The Federal Reserve Board of Governors, some of them are saying 0 times, and some are saying 3 times by the 4th quarter. However, in the fourth quarter of this year, something big is happening on a Tuesday in the second week. So typically, whenever we see a presidential election, the Federal Reserve will not act for the 2 months before the election. So, will we see any decreases in 2024? Right now, most prognosticators are banking on about 2 decreases for a total decrease of 0.5 percentage point, depending upon what inflation does between now and September. Inflation numbers came out today, and the word that's being used is sticky. So core inflation is still being sticky, so now that leads into uncertainty of if we will see any interest rate decrease this year or not. In 2023, we see that the different markets return different rates of return. So the NASDAQ, the technology-heavy index, returned the highest level of return with a ginormous, close to 40% rate of return last year. The S&P 500 also had a very good rate of return in 2023, but the Dow Jones was greatly lacking. When we got to May 1st of last year, the S&P 500 was up roughly 12% for the year to date. 92% of that increase was comprised of 7 stocks out of 504. On May the 1st, over 60% of the S&P 500 was negative year to date. If you owned those 7 stocks last year, you did extremely well. If you were broadly diversified, you still did well, but not as well as what you see as far as from the NASDAQ. And so that goes down to concentration risk. So how is the economy really doing if we're seeing the majority of gains coming from a handful of companies? Tonight we're going to talk about 3 separate risks in 2024. The first one being market risk, and I want to encourage you to think about a different type of market risk. And it's market risk that begins in your own minds. It begins with your philosophy and your ideology, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about no plan risk. And how does no plan risk actually influence your decision making? It allows you to be swayed in decision making based upon factors other than facts and math. And number 3, we're going to be spending a lot of time on Washington risk. And Washington risk is brought down into 2 categories. One is tax risk, and the second one is legislative risk. Those things will play into the things we're going to talk about tonight, but 3 risks as far as our main focus for the evening. With market risk, we see this young man here who's evaluating the market in probably the most important posture you could ever imagine, and that is with eating popcorn. We all know popcorn is one of the key things as far as our nutritional system, and so he's a very wise young man. He's looking at the stock market, he's seeing it going up and down, but what does he have on his face? 3D glasses, right? When you look at the color of the lenses, though, they're blue and they're red. So he's looking at the stock market through glasses that on one side are blue and one side are red. One of the large risks that has really increased over the last 12 years, and I see it in conversations with people all across the country, it's whenever we make investment decisions solely upon our political philosophy or political ideology. Well, what do you mean by that? The day after the election in 2016, at 2:37 in the morning, I received a text message. Now, being a father of 3 boys that were just coming through the teenage years, when your phone buzzes at 2:37 in the morning, you obviously look at your phone wondering where you're going to drive to and who you're going to pick up. In this case, though, I saw it was a client that lived in Florida. I decided to ignore the telephone call, right? However, I get up most mornings around 5 a.m. to prepare for the day. I looked at my phone, I saw the text that came across. Wonderful, wonderful man. From a political standpoint, he would self-describe himself as not just leaning more to the left, but being very strong on the left side. The text was, Donald Trump won the presidency, and again, I'm paraphrasing what he said, okay? I probably couldn't say what he said in the text message, so I'm paraphrasing. So Donald Trump won the presidency. He has the nuclear codes. This is a dictator. This is going to go bad. Put me in cash. We look over the next 4 years. He's still sitting in cash today. Okay? So he made an investment decision solely upon his political ideology. Before we all of a sudden think too much that maybe he made a mistake, let's walk through another story. November of 2020. I received 2 phone calls the very next day after the election. Mr. Biden is now our president. We're heading into socialism, possibly communism. Therefore, our economic foundation is going to crumble. Get me out of the market. Put me in cash. And there are some clients that have made that decision. They're still sitting in cash today. In the last 10 days, we hit an new all-time high on both the NASDAQ and the S&P 500. Were either decision right or wrong, good or bad? What I want to encourage you to think through is this. Do not make investment decisions for your portfolios solely upon your political ideology. That needs to inform your investment decisions. However, there's more information that needs to play into your decision making. At the end of the day, the stock market goes up or down. An individual company will go up or down solely based upon their ability to drive more earnings in the future than what they have driven in the past. At the end of the day, that's why a stock, an individual company will go up and down. That's why the broad-based markets will go up and down. So, what you need to think through is this. Whenever there is a change in leadership in our country, which happens either every 2 years or every 4 years, right? Whenever we see that, that really sets a point of redefining the winners and losers in the economy and in society financially based upon the political agenda of whoever is in charge. So I would encourage you to look at whoever wins this coming year, whoever is leading in polls, leading up to it if you believe polls, and ask yourself the question, be an informed voter. And ask yourself the question, if we see this particular outcome, based upon the agenda of the individuals running, which industries and which companies will be in a better position to drive more earnings in the future? And which industries will end up making less money in the future? Whenever you do that and you use math that really informs your decision, you get to a better position. I would also encourage you, when you're looking at your portfolios, whether your portfolio is in your 401k at work, your 403b, your 457, whether it's at Schwab or Fidelity or wherever it may be, you need to really start focusing upon 2 areas currently. The first one is, what is the overall risk of your portfolio makeup? And so with that, what I mean is, take a look at the individual positions and then start to run an analysis that would say, if this happens, how much could I potentially make or lose in my portfolio based upon recent past performance or volatility? So we use a tool called Riskalyze. It runs continuously, every second of every day. It measures risk and movement in 5 different mathematical calculations. It looks at every single investment that you have, and it says, if this happens, this is a high degree of probability that this stock, this mutual fund, this exchange-traded fund is going to go up or down by this percentage. Now, when you look at percentages, percentages don't speak to me in the same way that dollars do. And so if you say, my account could be down 8%, that does not speak the same language to me as if it says, when I look at my calculation, there's a 95% degree of probability that if this happens, you will lose $87,000. That speaks to me, okay? That's a real number. I understand that number. Do I understand that it's going to be down 8%? That's detached from real money to me, okay? So, number one is to do an analysis, and the second one is to look at price action. And so I don't know if anyone's heard of the phrase price action before, but price action says, if I own Caterpillar, what is Caterpillar stock? What is its price doing every single day? But what's it doing every 4 hours, every 2 hours, every 1 hour? And whenever it moves up and down, how is it moving? And then what trends can we spot? And so you're not just saying, what is the overall risk of the portfolio, but you're saying those individual holdings, how are they moving? Once you look at those two things, you can say, if interest rates decrease by 0.5%, my portfolio should do this because it's looking at past history. When it comes to market risk, make sure, number one, that you're not making the entirety of your investment decisions based upon your political ideology or philosophy, and then make sure you understand the risk in your account, and also make sure you understand the price action or how your underlying investments are moving. As far as this little segment, if you're sitting there saying, hey, John, I have a 401k. Can you guys help me figure out my risk and the price action? Just go ahead and send an email to info@creekmurwealth.com, or you can write down the sheets and get us to it later on. And hey, could you guys do an analysis of this investment account for me? If you have accounts that are managed by Creekmur Wealth, just let your advisor know, hey, can you walk me through the risk assessment and then also the price action assessment of my portfolio? We can cut a quick video of your portfolio, show you on the screen, so you can see very easily what is the actual risk inside your portfolios. Understand your risk and how things move. The second risk that's out there is no plan risk. When there is no plan in place, the plan needs to be driven by your goal objectives and then also by the math that is driving your goal objectives. If there's no plan there, well, then it's very easy to simply be kind of pushed around by the winds of what's happening. Right now, AARP put out a study 2 years ago. 81% of retirees and pre-retirees, so what's a retiree and a pre-retiree? A retiree is an individual who used to work for a living, and now they say, I'm no longer working for a living, so I've retired. Now, I still may do part-time work, I still may do consulting, but the entirety of driving income to live on is not coming from the work I do every day. That's a retiree. A pre-retiree is somebody that is 5 years from becoming a retiree. AARP study from 2 years ago in 2022, 81% of retirees and pre-retirees have no retirement income plan. So we're just making decisions of saying, hey, I'm 61 years old, I'll start Social Security at 62. Well, should you or should you not do that? And what's the math behind it? I have a pension. I've got 5 pensions on my five ways to claim on my pension. How do I do that? I 100% join Survivor because that's the one I'm going to mark. If I pass away, my spouse gets all the remainder. Well, that could be the best decision or not be. What's the math behind it? You have different ways. There's 4 different tax buckets. We have taxed always. We have tax deferred. That's your IRAs. Okay. We have capital gains, and we have never taxed. That's a Roth IRA. So, based upon your retirement income plan, you need to structure which bucket to pull your income from to pay the least amount of taxes. No plan. Over 91%, and from 2023, over 91% of adults, which is age 18 and older, have no financial plan. Without a plan, it's difficult to make wise, informed decisions. This is one of the greatest risks whenever I talk to people, whether it be from a podcast, a radio, a TV show, and I'm interviewing people, I talk to people on a plane. This was what I ask people. Do you have a plan? You're sending kids to college in a couple of years. What's your plan? You're heading to retirement next year. What's your plan for income? And I am astounded at the number of times there is no plan. Met with a couple last night who's really started in life walking some foundational financial decisions, and there was no plan to help them launch out in life, and they're really starting behind the 8 ball. You need to make sure you have a plan. Number 2, risk. As far as on plan, there's 5 main areas you want to make sure you have covered as far as a plan. One is cash flow. So what is cash flow planning? Well, back in the day, we used to say budget. But what I've noticed whenever I sit in a meeting, and as everybody knows, at Creekmur Wealth, all of our tables are glass tables. Well, that's really so I can do a behavioral analysis whenever you're sitting at the table in front of me. So, about 5 years ago, after a meeting, they were cleaning off the table, and we clean off the table after every meeting, and the person that came in said, hey, I've noticed there's a lot of fingerprints underneath the glass table. Well, that's kind of interesting. Why is there fingerprints underneath the glass table? So I started watching what people were doing, and the words I was using, the phrases I was saying, and I noticed that whenever I used the word budget, that all of a sudden body language changed. We had people started sitting back in their chair, they started folding their arms, and then somebody started picking up on the table. They're heavy glass tables. So all of a sudden then, I either uncovered a marital fight that I really didn't want to uncover, or it took them from a PTSD moment of a bad experience they had surrounding the word budget. So instead, now I lower my voice. And if you have a budget, we have a hard B, a hard D and G, right, and a hard T, budget. And so now I simply say, hey, let's do some cash flow planning. And so softer sounds, and people are like, wow, that sounds like a great idea. What is that? It's a budget. So the number one plan you need to have in place really is that cash flow planning. And what that really says is the money every month that you live on, where's it going? And some people, they have really strong tools, and they track every penny they spend, and they have spreadsheets, and they have different apps they have on their phone. Some people, they just go through and randomly keep track of things. Other folks say, hey, I have $1,000 in my checking account. I get $5,000 deposited every month. As long as I have $1,000 at the end of the month, I'm doing okay. Well, whatever your process is, you need to have a process. And you need to be able to identify the amount of cash flow you have, and then what are you spending on as far as in categories. Number two is an income plan. An income plan says, how do we drive the highest level of after-tax income legally? And we'll talk more on that in a minute. Investment planning, it goes in what we just talked about before, is making sure we understand the risk of the portfolio, we understand why the investments are moving the way that they're moving, and that every single investment portfolio is aligned to a goal objective. Tax planning is figuring out how to lower taxes. More details in a minute. Estate planning is how do you walk through to make sure everything is taken care of whenever you pass away, either to heirs or charity. And so those are the 5 planning areas to really focus on. And again, if you don't have your written plan down, you don't have it at home in a digital file, you don't have one put together that you know of, make sure you reach out to your advisor and just walk through and say, hey, help me put together this plan, or help me refresh the plan we have put in place, so you always have that information, because the plan is what informs your decisions. And so if you're sitting and watching at home on the live stream, and you say, hey, John, I've never put together a plan, or I'd like to have my plan refreshed, just make sure you send that email or info@creekmurwealth.com, and someone will reach out to you the next couple of days to work on that. So risk number 1 is market risk. Risk number 2 is no plan risk. Risk number 3 is Washington risk. And we're going to talk about Washington risk because 2024 is an election year. What's Washington risk? It's the risk Washington changes the rules and it negatively impacts your retirement approach, so your long-term approach. One of the things that we know is that Washington always changes the rules, or at least they're always attempting to change the rules. What we're going to talk about is protecting yourself from Washington changing the rules. With the risk in retirement, we have market risk, income risk. The next 2 are tied to Washington risk. The first one is tax risk, and tax risk is the risk your taxes are higher in retirement than you planned, leaving you with less income to spend. Think back to when you started your career, the first 5 years in your career. Did anybody, when you were talking with a coworker, a boss, did anybody ever have a conversation that sounded like this? Hey, right now, set aside as much money as you can into your pre-retirement 401k, because whenever you retire, your taxes are going to go down, and so right now you're paying the highest taxes you're ever going to pay. So a lot of folks did that, but then all of a sudden there's a risk right now. And for a lot of our retirees, their taxes they're paying now are either what they were before they retired, or very close to it, or a little bit higher. We're going to talk on tax risk in more detail. The last risk is legislative risk. And this is one that, when we're being informed, sometimes it's a challenge to be informed of what's coming down the pipeline. And I'm going to walk through a couple of examples that a lot of folks are not aware of as far as potential legislative risk. That's the risk Washington changes the rules, negatively impacting your approach. And so those two risks are key risks for us to walk through. And what I really want to do tonight is challenge you over the next 6 months, 7 months, to really begin to inform yourself as far as what risks are out there as far as in the political world, and then use that to inform your decisions moving forward, both in planning and then also as far as how you interact as far as in a political way. Let's just look at an example. Most of the time we can understand market risk. So let's say we have a 64-year-old that has $1 million in an IRA, and we want to solve for income to age 100. What is the max income to age 100? Now this is simply an example, and it's not to say it's good, bad, right, or wrong. And it's this individual, for our assumption, has a portfolio, they're $1 million, is split 50% between stocks or equities and 50% in bonds. Should they have it? Should they not have that allocation? It doesn't matter. This is simply an illustration. Their stock portion is earning 8%, their fixed income portion is earning 3.5%, and their effective tax rate is 20%. Okay? So those are our baseline facts. We're generating $50,000 of annual income off of this $1 million portfolio. But let's say the equities portion, so they have $500,000 of their $1 million portfolio in equities, and their assumption is they'll be making 8%. But instead, they only earn 5%. Oh, I think I messed up. Oh, there it is. So if the equities portion only earns 5%, so in other words, the market underperformed their expectations. We were planning on 8%, but over the next 40 years, 35 years, it only earned 5%. In that case, their max income went from $50,000 to $43,000. So that's market risk. We all understand market risk. But what if we said tax risk? Let's kind of quantify this a little bit. So everything stayed the same, 50-50 portfolio, $1 million in their IRA, max income to age 100. Earnings were still 8%, so now we say 8% earnings, that did not change. Fixed income is 3.5%. However, the tax rate went from 20% to 30%. That one change. The max annual income dropped to $44,000. So, if you think about it, 44 is only a little bit higher than 43. We recognize the impact of the stock portion underperforming. If taxes go up by the effective rate by 10 percentage points, it's going to have a very comparable impact as far as in your after-tax income. So tax risk. Taxes will do one of three things. They're either going to go lower, they're going to stay the same, or they're going to go higher. Now, whenever you go to get your taxes done, the focus is the least amount of taxes in the current year. That may not be your best decision for you, based upon the uniqueness of your situation. So, taxes going down. And I'm not sure, show of hands, does anybody think taxes are going down in the future? Okay. So, with the laughing in the room, I'd say nobody does. They're either going to stay the same or go higher. Okay? And we're going to talk about a little bit more of that here in a moment. Well, how can taxes change in retirement? Maybe one is situational. And so, what does situational mean? Well, so you could say, if we are a married couple, we're going into retirement, and each of the spouses has Social Security benefits, and we have a pension there, and so we're married filing jointly. Then one spouse passes away. This is a situation of life that just happened. Now we go from 2 Social Securities down to 1 Social Security, right? And the average that the surviving spouse is going to have is going to be about 2/3 of what the combined Social Security amount was. And so the rule is, and it's a little more complex than this, but the way we say it is, surviving spouse is going to get the greater of the 2 benefits. In practicality, the surviving spouse will end up having about 66-67% of what 2 benefits would end up have been. So one spouse dies, now we go to a single taxpayer. So that's situational, but how does that affect taxes? So we just see a little bit of a decrease as far as an income, but what changes? The standard deduction, in essence, is cut in half, but we have the similar level of gross income. And the individual taxpayer brackets are about cut in half of what it is for a joint filer. And so we have seen some tax returns recently where it went from a married filing jointly to a single. The RMD, what was forced to come out of the IRA, was set because of the ages of both people as far as spouses. The income tax bracket went from about a 22% bracket up to a 34% bracket. The tax went up drastically. So situational things can change. We also look to say, hey, this whole philosophy of when you're in your working years, you're in a higher bracket, you defer taxes. Retirement years, you're in a lower bracket, you pay taxes. What we have seen practically, though, is that whenever folks retire, if you're young and healthy, and so young is a state of mind, you can be a young 75-year-old, or you could be an old 45-year-old. Sometimes they say they have an old soul. Maybe they're just boring. And so you can be, a young individual that's a little bit older, or an older person that's younger. But if you retire young and healthy, what's healthy? Healthy is mobility. Okay? So if we retire young and healthy, what we've seen practically is the first 7 years when an individual retires, their spending is actually higher than what it was before they retired. Why is that? Time. We have time to do the things we want to do. So the situation has changed. So the old rules of saying in the working years I have a higher income tax bracket doesn't always hold true because the situation has changed. In other words, what's changed? Maybe our lifestyle has changed a little bit in a positive way. It really comes down to what kind of retirement do you want. And so there's an old financial planning rule that would say whenever you retire, to plan on live on 70% of what you lived on before you retire. I've not met anyone that is desiring to retire that wants to see a 30% cut in their standard of living. And so a lot of it really revolves around what are your goal objectives and what do you want to do. And so because of that, what I have seen practically work out is that tax rates generally, unless we have a change in law, stay the same or they go higher. So the question is, if tax rates stay the same or go higher, will that impact someone's retirement tax bill? So the retirement tax bill is the total amount of taxes that are paid over your lifetime on your retirement assets. So not just 1 year, but over the entirety of your lifetime. So the micro tax planning says, my goal is to reduce taxes in this current year. I'm going to make decisions that will reduce taxes this year. Macro planning says, my goal is to reduce taxes over my lifetime. So in other words, I want to choose to make a decision of which in this current year, I may pay more in taxes, but that decision has a compounding impact where I have fewer taxes owed over the entirety of my retirement years. If you believe taxes are going up in the future, then you're going to want to consider what decisions should I make in the current year or in the coming years that will decrease taxes in the future over my lifetime. So a macro analysis. Let's walk through some examples of this. If we have a 60-year-old with a 20-year tax liability, and in this example, they have $500,000 in the IRA, and they have a 5% growth rate. Good, bad, right, or wrong, it doesn't matter. The 5% growth rate is simply an assumption. However, what you will notice in this analysis, if the assumed rate of return is higher than 5%, then it's going to make the results from the analysis be larger. Okay? So here's our individual, and this individual has got $500,000 in their IRA. And this one says, okay, I want to make a decision where I want to push my taxes higher in the current year because I want to potentially decrease my taxes over my lifetime. So this would be someone saying, okay, I have an IRA worth $500,000, it's growing at 5% a year. When I hit age 73, I have been forced to start pulling out my required minimum distributions. And the money that's not used for my RMD, the net amount, it's not used for income, so all the rest of it is going to be reinvested, and I'm also going to earn 5% on those dollars. Everything stays the same. Inside the IRA, outside the IRA is 5%. And the account holder lives for 30 years till age 90. So the taxes we're looking at here, the total taxes paid on the RMDs is $191,270. The tax is paid on the growth of the reallocated assets. Those are the dollars you took out for the RMD, you paid taxes on it, the net amount, you're going to invest that and earn 5%. The taxes on that is $95,826. Whenever they passed away, the IRA goes to heirs, and we'll say a non-spousal heir, so it goes down to children. They had to pull the money out in a certain period of time and pay taxes on it. The taxes they pay on those dollars remaining in the IRA is $164,000. The total taxes paid in this scenario is $451,862. So that's our baseline, okay? So, but let's say the individual says, I want to convert some of those dollars to a Roth IRA, okay? This is, just so you know, there's over 120 different tax strategies or decisions you can make. Converting money from an IRA to a Roth IRA is one of them. Tonight, as I'm kind of working through things and building, I'm going to start talking about stacking strategies together, okay? And as some of you have talked to me before, some of these things will sound familiar to you. And so we're going to say we're going to convert to a Roth IRA. And on this illustration, I'm going to walk through it, and then I'm going to give you a caveat for real world, okay? And so everything stays the same, 60-year-old, 20% tax liability, IRA worth $500,000 and growing at 5% annually, account holder lives to age 90. That all stays exactly the same. Instead, they say, I'm going to convert my IRA to a Roth IRA. If they were in the 20% bracket, they would pay $100,000. However, the year in which you convert from an IRA to a Roth IRA, you actually have to pay tax on those dollars the year in which you convert it. So if they're converting $500,000 just in 1 year, then all of a sudden their tax bracket, when it all plays out, is going to double. So instead of 20%, they're going to be at 40%, okay? As far as all the taxes and fees, it's going to be roughly 40%. So that $100,000 actually doubles to $200,000. Now, where that may not be true would be if we say, hey, we're going to calculate to see how much we can convert every year so we stay at that 20% level as far as the effective tax rate. And so if we did that maybe over 6 years, 7 years, it would be $100,000. In this case, we're going to lump sum it at once. That tax becomes $200,000. With a Roth IRA, once you pay tax to convert it from the IRA to the Roth IRA, you never pay tax, the way the tax law is now, you never pay tax on those dollars at any time in the future. You have growth in there. It's not tax deferred. The growth is tax free. You pull the money out, you're not paying tax on the growth. And also, whenever the money goes to your heirs, they're not paying tax on those dollars either, okay? Your heirs have to pull the money out of the Roth IRA within 10 years, but as far as what they inherit will not be taxed. In this case, if you stretch it out over time on your conversion, it's going to be $100,000. If you do a lump sum in 1 year, your tax is $200,000. But compared to, you can't see that, but compared to the taxes you pay previously, it was $451,000. However, your tax bill as far as in the micro in the year in which you convert will be higher, but you're saying that pays less taxes as far as in the long term. If you believe taxes are going up in the future, you're going to want to pay taxes whenever they're at a lower rate. In a little while, you're going to see a QR code pop on the screen. And that QR code is actually on your sheets also if you have a sheet in front of you. That QR code will take you to one of our landing pages. On that landing page, you can actually input in your pre-tax IRA balance that you have. You can put in your tax rate, and you can put in your date of birth, and it would actually crank out for you in a very nice, simplified report what the taxes you're going to pay, just the way we walk through it here, and also would show if you simply do one tax strategy of a Roth conversion, what the taxes were going to be on there and what the difference is. And so I would encourage you, if you want to think about that analysis, you hit the QR code, and then you can go in and actually put those keystrokes in. It'll take about 3 minutes, and it'll spit out a report to you, and then all the documentation as far as on how the report was put together. And so it's a wonderful tool. The QR code is there. It'll also pop on the screen here in a little while. So when you think about it, potential taxes paid, $450,000 over time or $100,000 currently. If you think taxes are going up, you're going to want to say, that's a strategy that might make sense for us. Well, how else can taxes change? We mentioned situational, but the other way is legislative. And so whenever we say legislative taxes, right now the threat is that taxes are going to go up, not go down. There's a number of reasons why that is. We know that currently the national debt is sitting at $34.5 trillion. It is projected by the CBO that in 10 years from now, it's going to be at $58 trillion. The average interest rate on the national debt 2 years ago was 2.5%. That was the average interest rate paid. The first month of 2024, the average interest paid was 3.15%. The way we had this extreme shock with interest rates being decreased and going up rapidly, that means every single month that we move forward, the average interest rate is going to go up for a period of time until future interest rates get below current interest rates. And so because of that, the percentage of the national budget going to the interest on the debt is going to continue increasing. Right now, we are running a deficit of $1.9 trillion as far as on the budget in our country. If we see the interest continue to go up on the debt because the debt is expanding, is common math, right? It's simple math. We're going to see this debt continuing to rise. This is a huge issue moving forward, and the question is, how is that paid for? So if you have debt in your personal life, there's two ways that you can decrease that debt. The first one is you can look at your spending, and you can reprioritize your spending. And so you can look all of a sudden and say, boy, I'm paying, I signed up for Netflix 3 times, and I'm paying $9.95 a month for 3 times on my Netflix. You just cancel 2 of them. Or you say, we're eating out this much, let's eat out that much. Or let's make some adjustments as far as in our daily activities. Or let's subscribe to Under the Medium on YouTube and get tips all the time of how we could actually decrease the dollar amounts we're spending on a regular basis. So you change your behavior, right? And so the first step is, the federal government is, they can walk through and make some adjustments as far as in their spending with the priorities that they have. So we have not shown in the last 200 plus years a history of decreasing spending at the governmental level. As a matter of fact, there's line items in the budget in which they will communicate to us that this line item is, we're not requesting for any budget increase this year. So a 0% increase in this line item. Every line item has an automatic inflation rate tied to it. So even though we may not be budgeting for more dollars, there's an automatic increase as far as in the amount that's spent. So option number 1 is to cut spending. Option number 2 is to raise revenue. So how does a government raise revenue? By the increasing of taxes and fees. So if we know expenses will continue to go up, and we're not going to adjust expenses, then the only thing that can happen for us to be able to try to maintain some semblance of a balanced budget is to increase taxes. Now, way back in 1961, I believe the year was, John Kennedy says, in a rising tide, all boats rise. And so, goodness, now 7 years ago, myself and my family, we were in Bar Harbor, Maine. And I love Bar Harbor. I thought, what a great location. Acadia National Park is there. It's a great place to go and actually go and spend time in the Acadia. But Bar Harbor as a community is an interesting community. That day we decided to go, it was July 4th weekend, so it was on the 3rd, we decided to go on a boat ride to look for whales. And it was a very topsy-turvy day out there on the boat, and the captain of the boat was telling everyone before he even walked down the sidewalk to get on the boat, he said, hey, it's a very tumultuous sea right now, and so if you don't do well, as far as you get stomach sickness or seasickness, don't go. Well, there was about 50 people that were there that were English speaking, and there was about 200 tourists that were from China that spoke no English at all. And so they were trying to get the interpreter to explain to everybody, hey, it's going to be really bad, okay? So if you get stomach seasick, don't come on. So there was Stacy and I and our family, and we were on this boat, and we were heading out to the sea to go whale watching. We saw 0 whales, and they kept on saying, look at the puffins, which the puffin is a little sea bird that's out there. And so, but we're out there, and the seasickness really hit. And so it was all over the place. It was a wonderful trip. It gave us many memories of this trip. And so very interesting. However, whenever we walked down, before we got on the boat, we walked down the sidewalk to get on the boat, and then they had this metal plank, if you will, that we actually got on. I don't know what the official name is. We got on that to walk on the boat, and it was totally flat. And I didn't think anything about it. We just walked on. We went out, we enjoyed the tumultuous sea, we saw no waves, we saw a lot of puffins, we got to know a lot of our friends from China in a really intimate way, and we get back into the harbor to get off the boat. Everyone's running off the boat. I stumbled getting off of the boat because I walked up like this. So when I walked down, the plank was flat. When I walked in, so it's like, well, that's interesting. So I turned around and looked out to the harbor, and we actually walked down and got some ice cream. And in Bar Harbor, Maine, as a piece of warning, when you go there, they have wonderful blueberry ice cream. But they also have lobster ice cream, which has raw pieces of lobster in the ice cream that's frozen. However, when it's 87 degrees on a hot summer day and you're having lobster ice cream, the raw lobster melts. And so don't get the lobster ice cream unless you want to have that experience. So I'm sitting there eating my blueberry ice cream. I look out at the harbor, and all of a sudden I thought, there's cars driving across the harbor. What happened? And so then we walked down there, and we walked across, and sure enough, Bar Harbor is a harbor that has a sandbar in it. So whenever the tide comes in and out, the water rises, the water decreases. The water rises, the water... I was watching the boats. And what were the boats doing? When the tide rises, all ships rise. And I'm sure John F. Kennedy had spent time either in Chesapeake or at Bar Harbor, and he saw that happen. And what he's talking about there is, if the economy rises, everyone's incomes go up, individually as citizens. Therefore, we don't have to increase tax rates because we're going to get more revenue simply because the economy's up. Corporations will make more money if the economy expands. Therefore, we don't have to necessarily raise tax rates. We'll bring in more tax revenue. Well, that's one way it happens. The other way, which is the most common way we see revenue increase, is simply by increasing the rates or making adjustments as far as in the law. The huge threat is that we have Congress debating trillions of dollars in tax spending bills. This debate's happening in the Ways and Means Committee. It's happening in subcommittees of Ways and Means. But this debate is ongoing on the tax and spending bill. And I'm not sure if you guys all had read today's release of the budget proposal that is about 2 months late coming out. But it shows a drastic increase in spending across the board. And the drastic increase is about a 30% increase as far as the budget from last year to this year. How do we pay for that? And so it comes typically from more taxes. So how can taxes rise in retirement? Let's look at something that really they don't have to do anything. And so sometimes it's been shortened to the Trump's tax cuts. It's actually TJCA, was passed in 2017. In 2017, corporate taxes and individual taxes were cut. Corporate taxes were set to continue on, adjustments were set to continue on for the foreseeable future. However, individual tax changes that made to the code that we all get to deal with every year in our 1040 are set to expire at the end of 2025. What happened was there was a decrease in tax rates. And so between 2% to 5% was the decrease for every single tax rate that we saw. In 2026, tax rates revert back. So currently we're at 10%, 12%, 22%, 24%. We're going to go up to 10% to 15%, 24%, 28%, and so forth. And so rates are going up in 2026 no matter what. The other thing that most folks don't recognize is that the brackets are also adjusting. So they expanded the brackets out to the right, which means you were able to get more of your taxable income at lower rates. But they've narrowed those rates. So that means now you're going to have your dollars in a quicker fashion are going to be going into the higher tax brackets. So when that happens, everyone's effective tax rate is going to be going up. The other thing to recognize is the standard deduction is going to go, and this year's about $30,200. It's going to be basically cut in half on the standard deduction. So when that happens, all of a sudden then, it's going to change our ability to decrease taxes. Deductions, potentially less value to retirees. Whenever we get to the point where we pay off our house, so if you're going to itemize your deductions, what things can you put in the itemization anymore? And so really you have interest on your home, you have your real estate taxes, you have your state taxes, but currently your state and local taxes are capped at $10,000. Then you have charitable deductions, and you have miscellaneous medical expenses over a certain dollar amount. And very few people ever have that level of miscellaneous medical expenses. So let's take that one out. If your house is paid off, you don't really have interest for a deduction. You know your real estate taxes, your state and local taxes are capped at $10,000. So then you have your charitable contributions. So when it gets right down to it, by them adjusting what it is we can deduct, it kind of rules out the itemization. And if we cut down the standard deduction, now we have dollars that we're not going to be able to deduct as far as against our taxable income. 2019, stretch IRAs were eliminated for most beneficiaries. So if you inherit money from a non-spouse, you no longer have the ability to stretch out the removal of those dollars from the IRA. In the past, it could be stretched out for multiple generations, where you're simply forced to require a minimum distribution, but forced to pull out a small dollar amount every year. At this point in time, the longest you have to take money out of an account is 10 years. So all of a sudden, let's say you inherit a $250,000 IRA, it's got to be pulled out within 10 years. That's an extra $25K a year that has to come out, whereas in years past, it may have been $1,000 to $2,000 you were forced to come out. So that pushes up your taxable income. Today, there's trillions of dollars in tax and spending bills, and I'm going to throw a couple of them out to you. And this is a recent congressional debate, and I can get you the slide if you want it. But what it says in there, it says, to avoid subsidizing retirement savings once account balances reach very high levels. So this debate happened in a subcommittee 3 years ago of the House Ways and Means Committee, which is the Budget Proposal Committee. What they talked about doing was having a maximum amount inside an IRA before you're forced to do an RMD. In other words, you had to pull money out of your IRA once it hits a certain level. They didn't say what that level was. It also could be up to change. So you could be a 65-year-old, a 60-year-old, and if you have a balance that is above what is stated in that year, they will force you to do an RMD out and pay taxes on those dollars. And so it's a way of getting tax dollars out sooner and sooner. This did not pass. It didn't make it out of the subcommittee. But one thing we need to know, when a proposal comes before a subcommittee or a committee or the floor and does not pass, that proposal does not go away forever. It's sitting there to live to fight another day. So will we see this come up again in the future? Depending upon the makeup of the lawmakers, I believe we will. So proposals that have been out there, one is the new RMDs for total retirement assets over certain levels, limitations on retirement account contributions based upon income, limitations on Roth conversions. You can only convert so many dollars from a pre-tax into a Roth. A subcommittee actually explored taxation of earnings inside a Roth IRA once the balance gets to be above a certain level. So these are all proposals that are somewhere in the system that may come up sometime in the future. We cannot control those changes. We simply have to navigate those. So the question is, did your retirement dodge a bullet with those proposals that did not turn into law? Well, for the time being. But what we need to recognize is tax laws always change. And so because of that, we have to continually be looking at your plan, your retirement income plan, your estate plan, to make sure that you're continually adjusting and you're minimizing the taxes over your lifetime. So what if taxes rise? So oftentimes people look, and this is an actual study from CBO and the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan, and what they look at is what are the tax rates that people pay based upon where they're at. And it's broken down into quintiles. And so we have 5 quintiles here. So in 2000, the middle quintiles, this would be the taxpayers that are the 40th to 60th percentile. So that's kind of right in the middle. The tax bracket paid on average in that quintile was 28%. In 2020, the tax bracket was 22%. Right now, our tax rates are about the lowest that they have ever been historically as far as an effective tax rate. The highest tax rate that we have seen on earned income in the United States was actually 90%. So Ronald Reagan, when he was back making movies, he got to a point when the tax rate was 90% that he said he would only make 1 movie a year, and it would be for the dollar amount right below the 90th percentile tax bracket, because he did not want to work just for 10% of his payday. Will we ever get to that again? That's pretty extreme, but that was a historical time in our country. The middle quintile tax bracket rates in 2000 were nearly 30% higher than in 2020. My belief is, with where we're at as far as in the budget, that we should anticipate a rise in the middle quintile. And that's where a lot of people are sitting, is in that middle quintile. So let's just say we have a 60-year-old, same scenario, $500,000 IRA, 5% annual growth, 26% tax liability, starting in 5 years. So in this case here, if he has a 20% tax liability, and we go through the exact same scenario we had before, taking his RMDs out to age 90 and passing away at age 90, that's the same $451,000 number on taxes. But let's say in 5 years from now, his rate is adjusted because of legislative risk, and he goes from the 20th up to the 26% as far as in the middle quintile. In that case, for the first 5 years, he's at 20% bracket, and then the next, well, whatever that is, 25 years, he's at 26%. In that case, the amount of tax he pays on the exact same situation is $576,000. So he, in essence, he's actually paying an extra 20, goodness, what was that, 120,000 more? Yeah, $125,000 more in taxes because it went up as far as in the tax rates. If he converted to a Roth IRA, $500,000, in this case, let's say over 5 years, he did $100,000 a year. He kept himself in that 20% bracket. That cost him $100,000 in taxes. And so, in essence, he could have paid $450,000 as far as in taxes initially. It went to $580,000 roughly. Or he, over the next 5 years, he converts to a Roth IRA, pays $100,000 in taxes. He saves himself, in essence, $480,000. There's the QR code. And when you're kind of walking through and start talking about a Roth IRA, this is a wonderful tool to help you get an idea on your personal situation if conversion makes sense for you. I want to take a step back, though. On this scenario, there is ways that you can then say, what if we start stacking different strategies? So right now, we know on your itemized deductions, and let's just quickly, how many folks did a standard deduction this year versus how many folks itemized? So a lot more, probably 80% standard, 20% itemized, okay? And so when you kind of think about that, that standard deduction is a big deal. But why do we not itemize? It's because our standard deduction currently for this next year is a little over $30,000. And so to have enough that you can itemize to get to $30K, for a lot of folks doesn't make sense. But let's say you say, okay, John, I get it. I see how taxes are going to go up. I want a Roth conversion. But if I do $500,000, now all of a sudden that shows up as income this year. So now I'm going to have a large tax bill. If I do it all in 1 year, it's basically 40% is what you said before. I have $200,000 in taxes. But let's say we do the Roth conversion. And everyone's got different portfolios, and we have different situations. But let's say way back in 2016, you had made an investment and you bought a stock that symbols NVDA. So you put that money in there, all of a sudden it grew to a couple $1 million today in 7 years. It just went crazy. Or you bought Super Microcomputer 2 years ago, and it's gone up close to 1,000%. And so you just got lucky on that one, you made it. Or you bought Apple way back in 1990, and you invested $10,000, and now you have $3 million today. And so it just went up, right? You have huge capital gains. And you say, you know, I'm charitably minded. I'm going to be giving some dollars to charity every single year. And so I'll sell a little bit of my Apple stock or my NVIDIA stock or my Super Microcomputer stock. I'll sell that, and then I'll give that money to my charity, my church or my parish or whatever it may be. So when you do that, that's a deduction, but you might not be able to itemize it. Why? Because the standard deduction is so high. And so you're not going to have enough to do that. So one thing you can look at doing is this. You can open up what's called a donor advised fund. So I mentioned over 120 different strategies, and Roth conversion's one, donor advised funds, and I want to think through. So if you're charitably minded, you can open up a donor advised fund. A donor advised fund is just a brokerage account. It's actually a 501c3, and so it's a not-for-profit entity. Donor is you, it is me. Advised, it's a fund, so it's an investment, but the donor is advising. So in this case here, you could say, I'm going to take, let's say a $500,000 Roth conversion. This is an extreme example, okay? And you can say, okay, over the next 30 years, I'm going to give about $15,000 a year to charity. That's just kind of my pattern and what I've been doing. So that's $450,000. Instead, what if I give $450,000 into the donor advised fund, the highly appreciated stock? I put it in the donor advised fund this year. That now counts potentially in my itemized deduction calculation. Then I do a Roth conversion for $500,000. We have to do the math. We have to prove things out. Every situation is unique. But we have a $450,000 itemized deduction. We have a $500,000 Roth conversion. Our net income on that, taxable income, is $50,000. So in doing that, we wipe away the micro, the current taxation. We wipe away the future taxes. And then you're simply on your donor advised fund, every year, whenever you want to, in your timing, you can go in and sell your individual stock. You can sell it all at once and diversify it, whatever you want to do. However, you can send, so all of a sudden, then you can go online and say, hey, my parish is this name here. Since it's a not-for-profit, it's registered with the federal government. All the information will be in there as far as where to send it. You can go in and say how many dollars, when do you want to send the grant to the charity. You can send it to Critton Center. You can send it wherever you want to. St. Jude. You can do it every year. You direct and advise where it's going and what the dollar amount is. So in essence, you're accomplishing, you're doing everything you've always done, but now you've layered two strategies together. You've decreased the taxes in the micro in the current year, and you've also decreased the taxes over your lifetime. Make sense? So it's taking multiple strategies and lining them up. When you do that, you have the ability to start with your income plan, start decreasing taxes across the board. Judge Learned Hand, U.S. Court of Appeals, Circuit Court, he says there are two systems of taxation in our country, one for the informed and one for the uninformed. The Internal Revenue Code, for all of the anxiety we have whenever we talk about it, it in essence has a certain level of discretion in how much taxes that we choose to pay. However, that discretion comes with the realization that we have trade-offs. And so if we make a choice to defer a portion of our income to future years, we put money into our retirement plan at work, we are making a choice to decrease our current taxation to pay the taxes in the future. But that's a choice you made to decrease your taxes. If you choose to layer a number of different strategies together, then you're making a choice to decrease the taxes that you pay. Whenever you look at taxes, and you look at it anywhere, it always revolves around a leader. And we say a leader of what? A leader of government. And so we kind of think about, our country and the founding of our country. Think back to the Boston Tea Party. We have no taxation without representation. And so there's taxes involved. If you put your mind on, if you're a reader of ancient texts and books, if you go back to, let's just say in the Bible, in Matthew, I believe 22, we have Jesus who is teaching the disciples, and one of the things he says is to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. But the thing of it is, he never tells us to give Caesar a penny more. At least that's my interpretation. And so what I take away from that is, we always follow the law. You always do what the law says. You do not try to hide income and hide money. However, we need to be wise in how we make sure we know the law and we apply the law. And Learned Hand, a judge, is saying the exact same thing. I'm going to kind of stop right now. If you happen to have any questions or want to text them in, feel free to text them into that number. That's our office number. It goes to our text machine, and they'll send questions over. If you're on the live stream, same thing. If you want to text it in the phone number on the screen, 309-925-2043. And I can be here all night. So if we have any questions, we can go over the information we talked here. However, I did want to ask, while you guys are thinking about that and texting questions in, Stacy and I started tonight talking about having a blueprint. And we built our house with our main goal was we wanted to have a place for people to gather. And we wanted to be able to create memories. We wanted to be able to have conversation with people. We wanted to be able to sit around and laugh and cry with people. We wanted to share food together. We wanted to do things together. And I think about that, and some of you all may know, my father passed away 3 years ago. And I have this memory etched in my mind right now. And it was actually from 4 years ago at Easter. And I remember, first of all, seeing my dad asleep in a chair in the living room. And as everyone's around talking and having a good time, he fell asleep in the chair in the living room after lunch. And so I remember that. But I also remember looking outside of our house, and I'm in the big living room. I look outside around the fire pit. There was no fire there. But my dad was sitting around the fire pit, and all the grandkids were there, and all the kids that weren't even relatives of ours were sitting there. And there was the grandkids from the other side of my family, from Stacy's side of the family, sitting there. And there's my dad holding court. And he is sitting there, and I walked out and just kind of stood on the porch and listened. And he was doing what he always did, which he had this incredible mind, and he used the Socratic method. And he would start asking questions. And then he'd ask a question of one of the kids, and it usually was a question kind of just of a informational nature. But then once he asked it, then he would say, "Oh, that's kind of interesting. Well, what about this? And what about that?" He would then start digging deeper, and then he was teaching life principles and character traits in the midst of that. And I thought, man, I am so blessed to have that memory in my mind. It helps guide me. It's one of those things that helps me actually even gauge my own behavior and things that I do whenever I'm around other people. And all of a sudden I thought, we started off with a goal to have a house that we were going to be able to do those type of things in. And then we had a blueprint that was created, and there was a problem in the blueprint. And the problem was there was an angle. That angle caused us to spend 50% more. And then I listened to an older builder with a lot of experience who was able to point out what the problem was. Then I talked to his son, and he said, "Hey, here's the thing you can change on this, and it will actually come in right at budget, maybe if we're lucky, a little bit under." We made some decisions with that information. And then based upon that decision, once we moved in, we had to make some other adjustments. And the window where I looked out actually to see my dad first interact with those kids was in the blueprint, and all of a sudden one of the carpenters had made a mistake one day. And so I walked in, and I'm talking to the head carpenter. I said, "Something's wrong in this room. What is it?" He got out the blueprint, and he looked at it, and he goes, "Well, goodness, there's supposed to be a window there. There's no window there." And it's like, there's a lot of decisions to make, right? So I can kind of see how that would happen. And so they didn't execute the way they should have executed. But I said, "So how do we fix this?" And they said, "Well, the way we fix it is this and this." And I said, "What's that going to cost me?" And they said, "Well, it's not going to cost anything. It's our mistake." I said, "Okay, great." And so we walked through, we got that fixed. Well, then I was able to stand at that window and look outside. Well, life happens. Adjustments happen. Things happen in life that we're not planning on. And all of a sudden, then our plan gets turned upside down. Well, then we have to modify our plan a little bit to make sure we accomplish the same objective. If I could have said, "Hey, just leave the wall there, it's no big deal." But I just nicely worked with them, and we got the window there, and I was able to have that memory now in my mind. It's the same thing on the plans that we create. Things happen. We have a goal in mind, begin with the end in mind. We have the goal, you need to build a plan you can write down. Once the plan is built, you might need to make some adjustments because all of a sudden, it doesn't work out. Your goals and the financial resources don't properly align. Then all of a sudden you build it, and life happens. Tax law changes. The markets do this. Interest rates jack up. You end up spending more because inflation, it costs 20% more to live than what it did 4 years ago. That's out of your control. So what do? You go back and make adjustments as far as in your blueprint. Folks, we talked about 3 risks tonight. Market risk, looking through the proper lens and using math to base decisions. We talked about no plan risk, having a plan, you put it together, you work it out the best way you can. And we talked about Washington risk, legislative risk and tax risk. Bring all that together to accomplish goals and live out a plan. So, Stacey, I'm going to leave it up to you as far as questions. I'll look at my little device here to see if anything comes up. Okay, first question. What are the age restrictions or limits with a Roth conversion? With the Roth, there's two ways to get money into a Roth IRA. The first way is through a contribution. And so a contribution, the first rule is you have to have earned income. And so now whether you contribute to a Roth IRA, or if you have a 401k, or if you have a 403b, if you're a teacher, or work for a church possibly, or if you have a 457 plan, which that would be a governmental plan, if it has a Roth feature, you can contribute to the Roth. But those will be contributions. And so anybody at any age is able to make contributions. Now, for a Roth IRA, there may be some earnings limits that if you make over a certain dollar amount, you're limited. That's a contribution. A Roth conversion is whenever you have money in a pre-tax account, so be an IRA, and then you say, I want to convert the tax status of those dollars from pre-tax into after-tax. And so I'm converting the dollars, so a Roth conversion. Anybody at any age can convert any amount in any year. So anybody, any age, can convert any amount in any year. And so there's no limits on that. The one thing you have to keep in mind is whatever dollars you convert is taxable in the year in which you convert it. So as much as possible, you should look for offsetting decisions that could decrease any taxation there. Or you could say, I want to convert up to the next tax bracket. Andy Anderson, who did the opening here, if you don't know Andy, he is phenomenal at calculations as far as on a Roth conversion. Clark Randall, our Director of Financial Planning down in Dallas, phenomenal as far as in Roth conversion analysis. And so if you're walking through that, I'd say encourage you to do the QR code and do the preliminary analysis, and then reach out to us and say, let's go to a deeper analysis on that one. So good question. Are there any advocates in Washington who are the watchdogs advocates fighting for the legislative rights of retirees? So there are advocates in Washington. There is both paid advocates and non-paid advocates. An organization that all of us over age 50 know, AARP. They have a large arm that is in Washington that is definitely advocating for the rights of retirees. There is two other organizations, and their names slip me. FSI is one of them. The second one slips my mind. I'll bring it up in the next day or so. There we go. And so there's other organizations out there that also have different levels of advocacy as far as for retirees and those entering retirement. And so they're organizations you probably want to align with at some level. I will say that whenever Stacy turned 50, she received her AARP card in the mail, and she ripped it up and threw it in the garbage. And so I'm not sure why that was. And so Beverly did also. We're all getting older, right? It's better than the alternative. So anyway, should have paid her $20 membership fee or whatever it is. A great question here. Where do you get the funds to pay the taxes if you do a lump sum conversion to a Roth? Doesn't that lump sum tax payment affect your investment income? Great question. So you owe money on the Roth conversion the year in which you do the conversion. The absolute best decision is to keep as much money as possible into the Roth IRA. So, however, you do have the opportunity to do withholding on the Roth conversion amount. So let's say as an example, you could say, hey, I want to convert $50,000 of my IRA to my Roth IRA, which becomes taxable income, but withhold 20% of the dollar amount whenever you do that. So $40,000 goes to the Roth, and $10,000 go to my taxes, my federal taxes. So that is one thing you could do. However, best principle is that we put all the money into the Roth IRA because then it grows tax-free at this time. And so that way you need to find other places as far as to pay the taxes. And the other thing you want to keep in mind is if you end up having to pay taxes on a Roth conversion, you want to make sure that you're withholding enough from other sources or making quarterly payments. Otherwise, you will have a penalty for underpayment. And so you want to make sure that you take advantage of that, have the proper calculations. Yep, so the lump sum tax payment, that does affect your total income, so it's the gross amount of the distribution. And so even if you do withholding, let's say in that previous example, $50,000 in the conversion, you withhold $10,000. The total amount, the gross amount, is actually used in the formulas that would affect everything as far as tax bracket. It affects the taxes of other items, such as how much your Social Security is taxed. It also affects, if you are 65 plus, actually, if you're 63 plus, it also actually affects the calculation for Medicare premium. And so Roth IRA conversion does impact any Medicare premium dollars that you're paying. So you want to make sure that you understand that. Now, that does not mean, let's say all of a sudden you have the Medicare penalty because the Roth conversion pushed you over. That does not mean that that's necessarily a bad decision. However, you want to make sure you're making that decision with a full understanding of what that extra cost is going to be for 1 or 2 years. So that's a rolling look back there. Yes?
There might be a lot of people that don't know that look back of 2 years. That became a big surprise. And you try to be pretty knowledgeable about stuff, and I was hoping
Yeah.
to know what in the world is the look back.
Yeah. So, is everybody familiar with Medicare, that whenever you hit 65, we go on Medicare? And whenever we do that, there's a Medicare premium. It's a monthly premium. There's income limits. And once you hit certain income, as far as taxable income, and it's a modified taxable income, there's certain add backs and certain takeaways. But once you hit that level, married filing jointly, don't hold me on this, I think it's $206,000 for married filing jointly in 2024. I think it's $103,000 for a single tax filer. But once you hit that level, then all of a sudden your monthly Medicare premium goes up. And the thing of it is, it's not like your effective tax rate, okay? If you cross over by $1, then it goes up. They look back on the rolling income for 2 years. And so on that, if you do, let's say, a Roth conversion and you're 64, that Roth conversion income is going to be used in the calculation as far as on what you pay in Medicare premium. And so the 2-year look back is critical to make sure you understand how that's going to affect you. I've already retired. Can I change my retirement pension plan? So every company is different as far as in their rules. So we have retired, and then we have submitted or filed for our retirement income, our pension. And so if you have a pension, there's a little bit of difference there. I'm assuming the questions are really about pensions and not so much Social Security. And so with that, if you have retired, so let's say you retire at 58, but your pension, you can defer it till age 62. Well, in that case, you've retired, but you've not made a declaration of what it is you want to do. Once you make the declaration and you say, here is the pension I'm going to take, at that point in time, it cannot be changed. It becomes a contractual agreement. And so at that point in time, that is in stone. Social Security, you used to be able to change at one time, and they've adjusted the rules on Social Security to where really once you make a decision, you're really locked in at that moving forward. I love this question. Why is my CPA not in favor of doing Roth conversions? And so, why is my CPA not in favor of doing Roth conversions? Has anybody ever sat down with your CPA and then they said to you, hey, you owe $3,219, whatever the amount is, as far as what you owe. What was the feeling that you had in your stomach at that time? And whatever the amount is, and I just talked to someone today, and they said, yeah, I had to pay so much in taxes. Well, then it's kind of like when I talk to a lot of tax preparers, the first question that comes out of the person's mouth is, well, what did you do wrong? And so there's a certain level of blaming there. And so I jokingly say that, but when you think about it, that does play into the decision. So remember back when I talked about micro and macro. Micro is paying the least amount of taxes in the current year. Macro is paying the least amount of taxes over your lifetime. Most CPAs, they have a view that we know the tax law today, and we also know the TJCA is going to expire on this point in time, and here's what should happen However, Congress can change the rules at any time. So let's have the philosophy to pay the least amount of taxes today and not try to guess what taxes are in the future. And so that is the reason why a lot of CPAs do not like the Roth conversion. That being said, if you think a Roth conversion is a good idea and your CPA does not think it's a good idea, what I would encourage you to do is I would encourage you to talk to your CPA and say, hey, can you develop a relationship with the CFPs and with the Director of Financial Planning over at Creekmur Wealth Advisors? They have some really interesting tools, and they're academics, and they would love to walk through this. They can walk through the analysis to see if it would make sense in my situation. Would you be willing to talk with them? And so I would encourage you to have that conversation. And we have developed some really great relationships with a number of CPAs just by the approach that we walk through, and we can able to show them the total taxes savings, and then it becomes something which is a little more agreeable. And so, and I think I'm going to take just a minute here and close out. Yep. Last question, John, is there anything we can do right now to get more insight on how we can potentially improve our current plan? On that one, great question. Everyone is different in a different phase of life and a different situation. I would encourage you, with everything we talked about, the 3 big risks, layering of taxes, and some folks say, how do I know? Or does my advisor know? How do we know what strategies to layer? On all of that, I would encourage you to reach out to your advisor. If you don't have an advisor with our firm, just reach out and say, I want to talk to somebody. And just ask specifically, with the plans, the 5 plans that John laid out, in this particular area, can we go back and review my plan of where it's at, and then any adjustments that need to be made because of changes on the legislative risk or tax risk, and then we'll go in and recalculate all the numbers and make sure it's fully updated for you. Guys, I'm going to close out, and thank everyone for watching the live stream, and thanks for being here. And I'll be around here in East Peoria for as long as you guys want to talk. So anyway, thank you very much.